Okay, welcome back to Sklar Bikes YouTube, where last time in the shop we built a bike frame, road bike frame for my friend James, and today we're gonna work on the fork. So a fork really only has two basic dimensions that we care about. So first is axle to crown, which, let's get a fork, super something fork. So the two numbers are the distance from the axle to the crown, and that's important because if that's too long or too short, it affects it'll bring down or bring up the head tube of the frame, so it would affect the head tube angle, bottom bracket drop, all that stuff. And then the other important dimension, you'll notice that this is not a straight line. The fork blades angle off of the steer tube here, and that's the offset or the rake of the fork, and so that affects a dimension called trail, which that's a whole conversation, but trail, offset, head tube angle, all are important parts of how the bike handles. Yeah, so we'll set up a fixture so that those two measurements are correct. We're going to cut the blades first at the steer tube, then at the dropout, then we'll get those welded on, brake mounts, cable guides, and we'll be good to go. So a lot of the forks I make are a lot more complicated than this one. For example, I'll do like a segmented fork. Here's some parts I've had made, fun little logo in there, where we make the leg by welding together the tubes. And then this whole sleeve gets brazed onto the leg. If you can imagine, that's the fork crown. Typically I also use a hooded dropout. So we would take the leg and miter it to this before it gets welded together. But in this case, we're using, this bike has rim brakes, it has QR, is an old-fashioned bicycle. So we're using a QR dropout that has this plug style. And then we're also doing unicrown blades. So these are some really cool old True Temper blades that I got. They're new old stock, very nice and light for a road bike like this. But you can see the blade just plugs right into the dropout. So that makes this pretty darn simple. Okay, so long story short, I started this video and I was going to make a really simple unicrown fork, but it turns out the materials weren't quite correct for the short axle to crown on this road bike, so we're switching to a segmented fork, which is way more involved, but it's cooler, gets the job done. So yeah, I have exactly enough material, so no mistakes. We'll try that out. This piece of tubing is going to become the sleeves that the legs get brazed into. So I face them down, and we're going to make a cut on the mill, and I want them both to be exactly the same, so I'm going to reference the faced end with the end of this tube block. Then I use a flat 1, 2, 3 block to align the tube block with the end of the mill vise, and we'll go ahead and make that chop. Marking center lines helps me get everything lined up when I weld these later. Oh, and my friend Chris stopped by to do some drawings. He should have some prints available later of me working the shop, which should be fun. So first, there's a lot of different ways to do this, but I weld kind of these fork crown sub-assemblies together. So this is the sleeve, I call it, and then the cross piece that connects the fork blade to the steer tube, and I do those first. And then we'll attach the legs, and then we will miter the crown to the steer tube. So here I am brazing the sleeves onto the legs, which is one of the last steps of making the legs, besides finish work. So I like to thin out the end of the sleeves, kind of a homage to traditional lug work. I don't do much of this type of work, so it's always fun to see these joints come together. I think they look really nice and traditional, and there's a really good functional reason for them as well. Okay, so it's many hours later, and finally we've made our blades. So people do this a lot of different ways. Some people do the whole, they'll make all the parts and then tack and weld everything together at once. I kind of like to get the blades made, and then I treat it just like a unicrown fork. So we'll get this into the fixture, which you may recognize from the last video as also my seat stay fixture. Works great for both. Then we're going to chop the steer tube side, and these are already cut to length, so we should be good to go, but we'll triple check it on the fixture once we have this top miter cut. So here we go. So the machine I'm using here is called a horizontal mill, or horizontal milling machine, and as you can see, there's a vise on a work table where I'm going to clamp the fork fixture, or fork mitering fixture I should say. Clamp that in at just the right angle, where I use a digital angle finder to find that. And then once that's clamped in, I feed the fork blades into the hole saw, which is what we're using to cut both miters at once, which is a nice way to be able to check, and you'll see here in a sec afterwards. I always double check with the caliper to make sure the cut is perfectly on center. And then everything gets loaded up into the fixture. This part involves a lot of staring to make sure the blades aren't rotated around the steer tube, which in my opinion is a good way to make these forks not look so good. So I do it by eyeball. The fixture ensures that everything's in the right place. Checking that the blades are the right length with the fork crown, and then we go ahead and tack it up. Okay, it's all tacked. I like to let things cool down all the way in the fixture, and then we'll check alignment before we weld it all up. This type of welding is called TIG welding, and it's what most people do for bicycle fabrication. Nice and precise. And I like to start on the dropouts, then I do the crown. There it is. Next, this is a rim brake cantilever fork, so we're going to put on those brake mounts. And finally, I have to braze on the crown race, so I'm scuffing up the steer tube so the silver flows nice. And that's flux for silver soldering it on there. I also needed to cap the end of the legs, so in this case I used some nickels. They just happen to be the right size. And this is the scariest part of the whole thing, is facing the crown race. Scary. Okay, there we have it. Made a fork. And we made a frame, and together it's a frame and a fork. So yeah, thanks for watching. As always, like and subscribe. More videos coming. Check out more stuff at sclarabikes.com. Okay, thanks, bye.